The grand chamber of the conclave of shards was a cavern of petrified light, a space where the dying breaths of 1,000 suns had been caught and woven into crystalline architecture. It resonated with the silent hum of ancient power, a thrum that vibrated not in the air, for there was none, but in the very essence of the beings gathered within. At its center, a swirling hololith of impossible scale depicted a singular, terrifying absence. It was a patch of space where the light of a distant nebula was devoured, a perfect and absolute void against the tapestry of the cosmos. This was the source of their fear, the focus of a debate that had raged for cycles, grinding the gears of galactic diplomacy to a halt. The object, designated Anomaly 734, was a vessel, a warship by all logical conclusions, yet it defied every known principle of physics, engineering, and warfare. It had appeared without a ripple in spacetime, a phantom sliding into reality from a place unknown. It emitted no energy, no heat, no radiation. It moved without propulsion, a silent god drifting through the trade lanes of the Cygnian hegemony. High Marshal Vorlag of the Cathar Imperium stood rigid, his silicate form catching the ambient light and refracting it into 1,000 glittering shards of impatience. His very posture was an act of aggression, a testament to a culture that saw the universe as a series of threats to be neutralized. He addressed the conclave, his voice a series of resonant, percussive chimes translated into the shared diplomatic language. It has remained inert for 66 rotations. It has ignored our hails. It has trespassed in sovereign territory. By the ancient accords, by the simple doctrine of self-preservation, this constitutes an act of aggression. Its silence is a threat, a display of power so profound it feels no need to announce itself. We have analyzed its trajectory. It moves towards the galactic core, a path that will intersect with the primary worlds of half the species in this chamber. We cannot allow it to proceed. We must act. Opposite him, suspended in a column of shimmering, cohesive light, was Weaver Prime Ilia of the Lumina. Her species had long transcended physical form, existing as a collective consciousness of pure energy. Her voice was a soft, melodic cascade of tones, a stark contrast to Vorlag's hard-edged pronouncements. To act is to invite a response we cannot predict, High Marshal. You see a weapon because you are a warrior. You see a threat because your history is one of conflict. But the Cathar Imperium has never encountered a silence so complete. Have you considered that its lack of a mission is not a stealth measure, but a statement? It does not hide its presence, it simply is. It exists outside the spectrum of our understanding. To fire upon it would be like a child throwing a stone at a concept. We do not know what we would be striking. Chancellor Ovis of the Cygnian hegemony, a being of avian descent with feathers of polished obsidian and eyes that held the shrewd, calculating depth of a master merchant, ruffled his mantle in agitation. His world was built on predictability, on the stable flow of trade and the sanctity of contracts. This anomaly was the antithesis of order. The Weaver Prime speaks of philosophy and the High Marshal speaks of war. I speak of stability. My trade routes are paralyzed. My fleets are held at a standoff, unable to approach, unwilling to retreat. The economic disruption is catastrophic. We require data, not speculation. Its composition is unknown. Scans reflect nothing, as if its hull is a perfect singularity. Its drive system is a paradox. It moves, yet it does not expend energy. It violates the fundamental laws of conservation. A warship that requires no fuel, no energy, is a weapon of infinite endurance. It can wage a war of attrition that could last for eternity. The High Marshal is correct to be concerned. This thing is an existential threat to the balance of power that has kept this galaxy in a fragile peace for millennia. Vorlag's crystalline form seemed to sharpen. The Cygnians see their prophets threatened and finally grasp the blade at their throat. Balance. There is no balance. There is only the object in us. It is a predator, a creature of the void, and it is testing our defenses. Its stillness is the coiled patience of an apex hunter. We have dispatched scout flotillas, our finest reconnaissance vessels. They dare not approach closer than a dozen light minutes, for their sensor ghosts report temporal distortions at the perimeter. The fabric of spacetime itself appears to be quiescent around it, as if the universe is holding its breath. This is not natural. This is technology so far beyond our own that to call it technology is an insult to our own sciences. It is something else, something akin to magic or a violation of cosmic law. The chamber fell into a profound silence, the weight of his words settling over the assembled. Delegates, each species, from the gaseous philosophers of the Hydron drifts to the silicon-based builders of the core worlds, felt the cold touch of the unknown. They were the masters of the galaxy, the inheritors of 1 billion years of stellar evolution. They had charted stars, harnessed singularities, and debated the fate of worlds. Yet they were reduced to fearful whispers in the face of a single, silent ship. It was a vessel that, according to their collective knowledge, shouldn't exist. Its presence was an insult to their mastery of the universe. It was a dark mirror reflecting their own limitations. Weaver Prime Ilia's light pulsed softly, a calming rhythm in the tense atmosphere. And who then are its creators? Our long-range observatories have traced its point of origin. The trajectory leads back to a singular, unremarkable system, a yellow dwarf star in the Orion Spur, a system we have long monitored but dismissed. Its sole sentient species is young, fractured, and primitive by galactic standards. They call themselves humans. Their history is a litany of self-inflicted violence and breathtaking contradiction. They possess a profound capacity for both creation and destruction. We observed them splitting their own atom, and within a single generation, using that same power to incinerate their own cities. They are considered a pre-ascension species, barely capable of unified planetary governance, let alone interstellar travel on this scale. It is impossible that they could have built this vessel. Chancellor Ovis adjusted his ceremonial collar, the gesture a nervous tick. Impossible, perhaps, but the data is undeniable. The vessel originates from their sphere of influence. Are we to believe a species that still employs chemical rockets for planetary egress somehow created a ship that manipulates spacetime itself? Perhaps they discovered it. An artifact of a precursor race, a dead god's forgotten weapon. If so, they are children playing with a tool that could unmake reality. This is, in many ways, a more terrifying prospect than them having built it themselves. It makes no difference, Vorlag chimed, his tone absolute. Whether they built it or found it, they now control it, and they have sent it into our space. These humans are an unknown variable. Their psychological profile is one of chaos and emotional instability. A species that wages war on itself cannot be trusted with a weapon of such magnitude. They are unpredictable, volatile. It is the duty of the Conclave to contain such threats before they metastasize. I propose a resolution. We dispatch the Cathar Grand Armada. We will surround the vessel. We will issue one final ultimatum. If it does not surrender for inspection and disarmament, we will deploy a gravity lance. We will collapse the space it occupies into a micro-singularity. It is a brute force method, but effective. We will erase this impossibility from existence. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated debate. The risk was immense. Firing a gravity lance in a stable trade sector was an act of extreme desperation. The temporal and spatial repercussions could be catastrophic. But the alternative, allowing the silent ship to continue its inexorable journey, was equally unpalatable. It was a choice between a known disaster and an unknown apocalypse. Ilia's light flared, a brilliant, commanding nova of pure energy that silenced the chamber. You would risk tearing a hole in the galaxy to destroy something you do not understand. You would answer silence with noise, a question with a scream. This is the folly of fear, High Marshal. Let us not be governed by it. There is one path we have not yet fully explored, a path that requires not might but courage of a different kind. We have hailed them on conclave frequencies. We have used mathematical constants and universal harmonics. We have not tried to speak to them in their own tongue. Vorlag scoffed, a sound like grinding stone. A primitive, chaotic language for a primitive, chaotic species. What could we possibly learn? Their grunts and squeals will not explain the nature of a reality-defying starship. We would learn their intent, Ilia replied, her voice soft but unyielding. And intent is the seed from which all actions grow. Let us send a message, not a demand, not a threat. A simple, open query in their dominant dialect. Let us ask them, who are you and what is your purpose? Let us give them the chance to answer before we condemn them. If we are to be the guardians of this galaxy, we must prove ourselves worthy of that title by demonstrating wisdom, not just power. The debate swayed. Ilia's logic, though rooted in a philosophy the Cathar found naive, appealed to the more cautious members of the Conclave. It was a final, peaceful option before the unthinkable alternative of war. The Signians, ever the pragmatists, saw it as a way to gather more information without immediate risk. After a tense period of delibe, the vote was cast. Ilia's proposal was accepted by the narrowest of margins. A specialized communication drone was dispatched. It approached the silent, obsidian monolith, its form a sliver of light against the all-consuming darkness of the ship's hull. It broadcast its message, a simple string of digitally rendered human speech, translated from the vast archives the Conclave maintained on every species with nascent technological capabilities. The message echoed in the void, a tiny, hopeful plea sent into an overwhelming silence, and for a long, agonizing moment the universe remained still. The Conclave watched, their collective consciousness focused on the hololith. The tension in the grand chamber was a palpable force, a physical weight that pressed down on them all. Vorlag's form was rigid with anticipation, already convinced of the futility of the gesture. Ilya's light pulsed with a hopeful, steady rhythm. Then something changed. On the surface of the impossible ship, a section of the perfect, featureless black shimmered. It was not a light turning on. It was not a door opening. It was as if a patch of the void itself had become less void-like. Text appeared, glowing in a soft, steady white light against the obsidian hull. It was not in the conclave's diplomatic script. It was in the same human dialect they had just broadcast. The letters were clean, precise, and utterly devoid of ornamentation. The message was simple. Two words that sent a tremor of shock and confusion through the grand chamber of the conclave of shards. "We wait." The two words hung in the void, a statement of such profound and unnerving calm that it was more terrifying than any declaration of war. They did not identify themselves. They did not state their purpose. They simply acknowledged the conclave's question with an answer that was not an answer at all. It was an assertion of control. They were not reacting to the conclave. They were allowing the conclave to act. The implication was clear. The next move belonged to the assembled species of the galaxy, and the silent ship would patiently, eternally await their decision. Vorlag saw it as supreme arrogance. Ilya saw it as a test. Ovis saw it as the prelude to a negotiation he did not understand, with a party whose currency was a mystery. The silence that followed was heavier than before, for it was no longer the silence of the unknown, but the silence of an entity that had finally calmly acknowledged their existence and found them wanting. The galaxy held its breath, and a species barely out of its own cradle had just placed the burden of peace or annihilation squarely on the shoulders of its ancient, powerful, and terrified elders. The conclave's decision was to send an emissary. A direct, face-to-face communication was the only remaining option before Vorlag's military solution became inevitable. It was a gesture of immense risk. To send a ship to dock with the anomaly was to place a piece on a board whose rules were unknown. Yet, they had no choice. A diplomatic vessel, a Cygnian cruiser stripped of all but its most essential defensive systems to appear as non-threatening as possible, was dispatched. On board was a delegation representing the three most influential voices in the conclave. A Cathar strategist chosen by Vorlag, a Lumina philosopher designated by Ilya, and Chancellor Ovis himself, who felt the responsibility to his people demanded his personal attendance. They approached the obsidian vessel with a caution that bordered on reverence. As they drew near, a section of the ship's hull dissolved, not opening like a hangar bay, but deliquescing into a gentle, swirling aperture of soft gray light. It was an invitation. The Cygnian vessel passed through the threshold, its sensors going blind as it crossed into the vessel's interior. The aperture sealed behind them, and they were enveloped in a calm, quiet darkness. Then light bloomed. It was soft, indirect, and emanated from the very walls of the chamber they now occupied. The space was vast, impossibly so. The interior dimensions seemed to defy the exterior hull. It was a perfect sphere of white, featureless, and serene. In the center, a single figure stood waiting. It was a human. She was tall and wore a simple, dark blue uniform that was purely functional, devoid of any rank or insignia. Her hair was pulled back from a face that was calm, composed, and unreadable. She stood with a stillness that mirrored her vessel, a posture of perfect, relaxed readiness. She was not armed. There were no guards. There was only her, the silent white chamber, and the odd alien delegation. Chancellor Ovis stepped forward, his attendants flanking him. "I am Chancellor Ovis of the Cygnian hegemony. We have come to seek understanding." The human female inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear, the universal translator rendering it with perfect fidelity. "I am Amba. Esad Eva Rostova, welcome aboard the Vigil. Understanding is what we offer." Vorlag's representative, a towering Cathar named Submarshal Kale, stepped forward, his crystalline body bristling with contained aggression. "This is a warship. There is no other explanation for its capabilities. We demand to know its purpose, its armament, and its intent." Ambassador Rostova's gaze met Kale's without a flicker of fear. "You call it a warship because you perceive its potential for destruction. You see a weapon because it is what you fear and what you understand. But the Vigil has no weapons, not in the way you conceive of them." "Absurd," Kale chimed. "Its silence, its imperviousness, its movement without propulsion, these are the hallmarks of a supreme weapon system. We tracked your scout probe. It was annihilated as it approached." "It was not annihilated," Rostova corrected gently. "It ceased to be compatible with the space it was attempting to enter. The Vigil does not project force. It projects a principle, a single fundamental concept that is enforced in the space it occupies. The probe you sent was an instrument of intrusion, of non-consensual observation. Its intent was a violation of that principle. Therefore, it could not exist here. The Lumina philosopher, a being of woven light contained within a crystalline focus suit, pulsed with a soft, inquisitive glow. A principle, a concept enforced upon reality itself. What is this principle? Rostova's expression remained serene, yet her eyes held a profound, ancient gravity that seemed at odds with the youth of her species. The principle is simple. Thou shalt not transgress with intent to harm. It is the foundational ethic upon which our unified civilization is now built. The vigil is not a machine in the traditional sense. It is a physical manifestation of our collective, unified will, a consensus of billions of minds focused into a single, coherent purpose. A wave of disbelief washed over the delegation. Ovis felt his finely feathered crest rise in shock. You are saying your ship is powered by a philosophical agreement? By ethics? That is a simplistic way of putting it, but yes, Rostova confirmed. We discovered that spacetime is not merely a physical construct. It is responsive to unified consciousness. When a species achieves a sufficient level of ethical cohesion and psychic resonance, the universe begins to listen. The conceptual drive, as our scientists have named it, does not burn fuel or manipulate gravitational fields. It redefines its own position in the universe by asserting its right to be there, an assertion backed by the moral authority of an entire species. It is a technology that cannot be reverse-engineered, only earned. It is impossible to build a vessel like the Asterisk Vigil if your species is fractured by war, greed, or fear. It would collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions. The revelation struck the delegation with the force of a physical blow. It was an idea so alien, so profound, that it shattered their understanding of the cosmos. Their own galaxy was a hotbed of disagreement, of ancient grudges and competing interests. The conclave itself was a testament to their disunity, a forum for managing but never resolving their endless conflicts. The Cathar built their empire on conquest. The Signians built theirs on profit. Even the wise Lumina were a collective of individuals who often debated for eons before reaching a consensus. The idea of an entire species, a species as historically chaotic as humanity, achieving a state of unified moral purpose sufficient to bend the laws of physics was not just impossible, it was a judgment. The vigil wasn't a threat. It was a mirror, and in it they saw their own failings. Submarshal Kale stood frozen, his warrior's mind struggling to process a weapon that was not a weapon, a power that came not from superior firepower but from superior morality. So your purpose, your journey to the galactic core, what is it? A pilgrimage? A demonstration of this moral authority? Neither, Rostova said, her tone becoming heavier, somber. We came to deliver a warning. We have been monitoring your galaxy for some time, ever since our own unification. We have seen the patterns, the conflicts, the slow march of progress, and the constant threat of collapse. You are all on a precipice, teetering between ascension and self-destruction. But there is a greater danger than the one you pose to yourselves, a danger you are not yet equipped to face. She raised her hand, and the white wall behind her dissolved, replaced by the starfield of deep space. But it was not the familiar starfield of their own galaxy. This was the empty, terrifying void between galaxies. And in that void, a single point of light pulsed with a faint, rhythmic beat. For generations, Rostova continued, her voice now a low, solemn murmur, our deepest radio observatories have been tracking a signal. It is not a communication. It is a residue, an echo of a scream that has been traveling across the intergalactic void for millions of years. It is incredibly complex, a fractal of mathematical data that models the rise and fall of civilizations. It describes a pattern, a recurring phenomenon, a great filter. The chamber grew cold. The Great Filter was a theoretical concept discussed by philosophers across the galaxy, a hypothetical barrier that prevented civilizations from achieving interstellar dominance. Some believed it was nuclear self-annihilation. Others believed it was resource depletion or technological singularity gone wrong. It is not a theory, Rostova stated, as if reading their thoughts. It is a predator. The signal is a warning, left by a civilization that encoded its own extinction into the fabric of the cosmos as its final act. We do not know what it is. A biological entity on a cosmic scale, a wave of self-replicating von Neumann probes, a phenomenon of physics that culls emergent intelligence. But the pattern is undeniable. Every few 100 million years, a wave of extinction sweeps through this local group of galaxies. It targets civilizations that reach a certain threshold of energy output, the very threshold the conclave as a whole is now approaching. It is subtle, patient, and absolute. She gestured to the image of the Vigil as seen from the outside, the perfect, silent void. "We did not build the Vigil asterisk to intimidate you. We did not build it for war or for conquest. We built it because the filter is coming. We achieved our unity not through philosophical enlightenment alone, but through the shared terror of a common, incomprehensible threat. The Vigil is our first answer, a shield, an ark, a vessel that operates on principles the filter may not recognize as technology. It is a sanctuary built not of matter, but of purpose. We came here not to conquer, but to see if you were ready to listen, to see if the civilizations of this galaxy could set aside their quarrels long enough to face the oncoming dark." The full weight of the truth descended upon the delegation. The impossible warship was not a human weapon aimed at them. It was a human shield, forged for a battle they didn't even know was coming. Humanity, the young, chaotic, primitive species, had not only solved the riddle of their own self-destruction, but had also detected a cosmic threat that the ancient and powerful members of the Conclave had entirely missed. They had mistaken a shepherd for a wolf, a warning bell for a death knell. Chancellor Ovis felt a profound sense of shame, followed by an even more profound sense of fear. "You are saying that we are all in danger, that our petty squabbles over trade routes and borders are meaningless. They are the very things that make you vulnerable," Rostova said, her voice filled with a heavy empathy. "The filter preys on the divided, it isolates and consumes. The civilization that left the warning signal was a single, galaxy-spanning empire, and it was not enough. Unity is not just a moral goal. For all of us, it is now a requirement for survival." The sub-marshal, Kale, a being bred for war and steeped in a culture of martial pride, slowly lowered his head in a gesture of Cathar submission, an act of deference so rare it was legendary. We were wrong. We saw arrogance in your silence. We saw only a threat." "You saw what your history has taught you to see," Rostova replied, her expression softening for the first time. "History does not have to be a chain. It can be a lesson. Humanity learned its lesson in a crucible of fire and blood on our own world. We learned that our greatest enemy was ourselves. We overcame it. Now we all face an enemy that is not us. The question is, can you overcome your own histories to face it together?" The Cygnian vessel departed the Vigil not as a scout returning from a hostile encounter, but as a messenger carrying a revelation that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. The report delivered to the Conclave of Shards was not a military assessment, but a philosophical manifesto, a plea for a new kind of existence. When Chancellor Ovis stood before the assembled delegates, his voice, usually so concerned with ledgers and treaties, trembled with the magnitude of what he had learned. He recounted Ambassador Rostova's words, the nature of the Vigil asterisk, and the chilling revelation of the Great Filter. The Grand Chamber, a place of argument and political maneuvering, became a hall of stunned, contemplative silence. High Marshal Vorlag, who had been prepared to order the annihilation of the human vessel, stood as if turned to stone. His entire worldview, built on the predictable physics of force and reaction, had been invalidated. Power, he had always believed, was the ability to destroy. The humans had presented a form of power that was the ability to cohere, to unify, to be in a way that reality itself respected. It was a power his species, for all its military might, could never hope to achieve. Their empire was held together by fear and obedience, not by a shared ethical consensus. A Cathar conceptual drive was a logical impossibility. He was the first to speak, his resonant chimes softer, stripped of their usual arrogance. "We have been blind. We have stared into the darkness between stars for eons, yet we never saw the true danger. We looked at a new species and saw only a reflection of our own violent past. We prepared to extinguish a light we did not understand, while a greater darkness gathered at our borders." He turned his crystalline form towards the hololith, where the image of the Vigil still hung, a patient, silent void. "This vessel is not a warship. It is a judgment, not a judgment of humanity upon us, but a judgment of the universe itself upon our way of life. It tells us that our disunity, our endless cycle of conflict, is a terminal disease." Weaver Prime Ilya's light pulsed with a somber, validating glow. "I sensed a purpose, but I could not have imagined its scale. Humanity has not transcended their violent nature. They have weaponized their peace. They have turned their capacity for unity, once a distant dream for them, into a shield against the ultimate void. They did not come to us as conquerors. They came as equals, offering a truth we were too proud to seek for ourselves." The debate that followed was unlike any that had ever taken place in the Grand Chamber. The old arguments of territory, resources, and influence evaporated like mist in the face of an existential galactic threat. The delegates spoke not of their individual species, interests, but of a shared future. The Cygnians offered their logistical networks, the vast trade fleets that could be repurposed to share information and technology. The lesser species, long cowed by the major powers, spoke with newfound courage, offering their unique knowledge, their scientific insights, their cultural wisdom. The true turning point came from Vorlag. He stood before the conclave, his form radiating a solemnity that silenced all others. The Cathar Imperium was forged in war. Our fleets are the most powerful in this galaxy. For millennia, they have served the cause of conquest and control. They have enforced our will upon others. Today, that purpose is revealed as hollow. A fleet that can conquer 1,000 worlds is useless against an enemy that consumes galaxies. But our strength need not be our folly. I pledge the Cathar Grand Armada, not as a weapon of the Imperium, but as the sword of the Conclave. Let our strategists work with the humans. Let our warships fly alongside the Vigil. Let the strength that we once used to divide this galaxy now be used to defend it. It was an abdication of empire, a gesture of unity so profound that it sent a wave of astonishment through the chamber. The Cathar, the eternal aggressors, were laying down their historical mantle and offering their might to a common cause. An alliance was forged that day, not of convenience or of fear of one another, but of a shared, terrifying purpose. The Conclave of Shards was reborn as the Galactic Defense Council. Ambassador Rostova was invited to join them, not as a representative of a foreign power, but as a founding member. She stood in the center of the Grand Chamber, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the ornate regalia of the alien leaders, and she accepted. In the cycles that followed, the galaxy began to change. Human knowledge of the conceptual drive was shared, not as a blueprint to be copied, but as a philosophical path to be walked. They explained that every species would have to find its own path to unity, its own core ethical principle around which to cohere. It was not a technology to be gifted, but a state of being to be achieved. For the first time, ancient enemies began to speak of reconciliation. The Cathar and their long-suffering neighbors started dialogues of peace. The Signians rewrote their economic models to prioritize mutual support over pure profit. The Lumina shared their vast archives of cosmic history, searching for any other mention, any other echo of the filter. The Vigil Asterisk remained their silent guardian, a constant reminder of the stakes. It became a symbol of hope, of what was possible when a species chose unity over chaos. Fleets from a dozen different species, once poised at each other's throats, now drilled in joint defensive maneuvers under the calm, watchful presence of the human vessel. One rotation in a high-level strategy session within the Grand Chamber, Ambassador Rostova stood with Vorlag and Ilya before the central hololith. They were analyzing the ancient signal, the cosmic scream, searching for any pattern that might reveal the filter's nature or its impending arrival. The signal has remained unchanged for the entirety of our observation, Rostova stated, her tone analytical. Its fractal complexity is immense, but its core. Message is stable, a warning, a lament. Ilya's light form shimmered thoughtfully. It is a monument of data, a tombstone for a dead civilization, but a thought has long troubled me. Why has no other species detected it? Our own sensors are incredibly sophisticated. We have plumbed the depths of the cosmic microwave background. We have listened to the songs of pulsars, yet this signal remained invisible to us until you showed us where to look and how. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the swirling data stream on the hololith. Our scientists believe it is because the signal is not broadcast in any dimension we normally perceive. It is encoded in a substrate of spacetime that is only accessible to a coherent, unified consciousness. It's a message that can only be received by a mind or a collection of minds that is already prepared to understand its implications. A species lost in conflict would be deaf to it. It is a failsafe. The warning only reaches those who have already passed their own internal great filter. Vorlag processed this, the implications settling upon him. So the key to survival is the very thing the filter seeks to destroy, unified intelligence. As he spoke, a new alert flashed on the hololith. It was not from the distant intergalactic signal. It was from a deep space sensor net recently deployed near the galaxy's edge, a joint Cathar-human project. The alert was flagged with the highest priority, a code that had never been used before. A technician's voice, a nervous Signian, filled the chamber. "Council, we are detecting something, a new signal. It is not the warning, it is live." On the hololith, a new data stream appeared. It was faint, but sharp and clear. It was not a lament. It was not a warning. It was a message, structured and intelligent. It was a language, one they did not recognize, yet its mathematical underpinnings were clear. It was a greeting, and it was coming not from the intergalactic void, but from a single, specific point deep within their own galaxy, a point that had been dark and silent for eons. It was coming from the center of a vast, previously uncharted stellar nursery, a place of creation. Rostova's calm demeanor finally broke. A flicker of something unreadable, shock or perhaps fear crossed her face. She brought up a star chart, cross-referencing the signal's origin. That is impossible. That region of space is home to the abyssal rift. It's a zone of gravitational chaos. Nothing should be able to form there, let alone transmit a coherent signal. The signal grew stronger, its complex modulations resolving into a clearer pattern. A Cathar linguistics algorithm began a brute force analysis, finding startling parallels to ancient, presentient dialects from a dozen worlds. It was as if the language was a protoform, an ancestor to them all. Then a second signal began from a different part of the galaxy. Then a third, and a fourth, all identical, all live, all originating from places long thought to be empty or desolate. Ancient Dyson swarms dormant for ages, the core of a gas giant once thought uninhabitable, a dead world at the heart of a forbidden nebula. Ilia's light pulsed erratically, a sign of extreme agitation within the Lumina collective. They are not new signals, they are awakenings. Vorlag stared at the hololith, his strategic mind racing past the impossible and grappling with the terrifying reality. The great filter, the warning, what if we misinterpreted it? What if it wasn't a warning about an external predator? Ambassador Rostova finished his thought, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a dawning horror that was far greater than the threat of any cosmic monster. What if it was a quarantine notice? The signals multiplied, lighting up the galactic map like a sudden bloom of stars. They were not a greeting, they were an activation sequence. The ancient, silent places of the galaxy were stirring, waking up to a unified command. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place as the Cathar algorithm returned its first successful translation of the repeating message. It was not a message of peace. It was not a threat. It was a single, chilling designation, a status report. Phase 1 complete. The subjects are now unified. The harvest may begin. The conclave stood frozen. The great filter was not a force from outside the galaxy. It was from within, an ancient, hidden intelligence that had been waiting, farming the younger species, allowing them to grow and struggle until they achieved the one thing it needed, unity. A unified galaxy was not a defense. It was a crop, ripened and ready for collection. Humanity, in their desperate and noble quest for survival, had not built a shield. They had rung the dinner bell. The vigil asterisk, their symbol of hope and unity, stood silent in the void, a perfect monument to a perfect, catastrophic miscalculation. The war they had been preparing for was not against a mindless force of nature. It was against their own creators, their own shepherds, and the true purpose of their existence had just been terrifyingly, irrevocably revealed. The silence in the grand chamber was no longer one of awe or fear, but of absolute, soul-crushing despair as the ancient masters of the galaxy began to awaken.